with 2020 in field view, we'll start with 2020, that's where most of the setup comes from, but they're really a matched pair. One is numerical, and then field view is a mapping portion. So there's 4 main boxes on the 2020 screen that are always going to be there. First, population. You can see the large number, right now around 32,000. That is the planter average. So if you have a 4-row plot planter, that's the average of the 4 rows. If you have a 36-row planter, it's the average of the 36 rows. Now that is in the last, for corn, it's an average of the last 300 seeds. Right, in the bottom left, you see the low row. Right now it's in 4, and you can see its population. Bottom right is the highest row. You can see which row that is and its population. There's a rainbow chart in the center there, and there's a large diamond. Right now it's all the way to the right. And then that large diamond corresponds with the planter average number. There's also a small diamond in there for every single row of the planter. Right now we can't see them because they're kind of off the chart there because the population's higher than expected. But there would be 1 diamond for every row. So if you have a 16-row planter, there would be 16. If you can't see them, but you see the large diamond, it means your planter is planting very consistently. Okay. Singulation. So singulation is a measurement in corn of the last few hundred seeds that are planted. How many of them were planted one at a time? All right, so here 99.4. So that means less than 1%, about 0.5% would have been a skip and or a multiple. All right, so singulation is very important to have as high as possible because it drives yield. If I can improve singulation by 1%, that 1% is going to increase yield by roughly 2.5 bushels. So this button is set up the same way as population. It's a different measurement, but the top number is planter average, bottom left is low, bottom right is the high, and then you can see the large diamond and all the small diamonds there for singulation. So this demonstration here is a 16-row planter. Below that, good spacing. So a lot of monitors for a number of years have shown average spacing, and I actually have that pulled up here. It's seed spacing over there on the right side. It says 7.3 right there. So that measurement is seeds divided by distance. So if I plant 300 seeds in 150 feet, I have an average spacing of 6 inches. Now, that doesn't take into account if they were every 6 inches, or if they were 5, then 7, then 6, then 6, then 4, then 8. Both of those could give me a 6-inch average. So right here, 94.8% of my last few hundred seeds have been at least 4 inches apart. 5.2% of my last few hundred seeds have been closer than 4 inches. Right, so I want a good spacing number as high as possible as well. Singulation is going to cost me about 2.5 bushels for every 1%. Spacing, 1% is going to cost me 1/2 bushel, 1/4 bushel, 1/10 of a bushel. All right, so a skip or a multiple is a much more costly error than having a seed 3 inches from the one beside it as opposed to 6. If I had to pick one to suffer a little bit, it's going to be spacing, because my yield loss from poor spacing is much less than from poor singulation. So singulation, if you see singulation errors and low singulation on one row, 95% of the time, that's going to be something going on with the meter. Spacing could be the way the seeds release off the meter. If they're not releasing consistently. Could be, as Aaron said, the field is rough and my row units are bouncing, causing the seeds to ricochet in the seed tube and become closer together. It could be I've got a bearing going out on the hex shaft and it's causing some of the rows, the chains on there and then the meters to turn erratically. It could be I've got a stiff rusty link in a chain. It could be I've got residue in the seed tube. There's many things that can cause spacing inaccuracies where singulation is merely almost always something going on in the meter. Bottom left here, downforce box. On this box, there's 2 numbers that you want to pay attention to, ground contact and margin. So on your planter, whatever the design or brand of your planter is, it's a different device, but there's some kind of a measuring device, a strain gauge or load cell. And what happens is the disc openers engage the ground, the gauge wheels contact and come up and hit the depth stop at whatever depth you've set. That the gauge wheel arms apply weight to the stop, and we measured how much weight's applied. So if your gauge wheel arms are hitting the depth stop, applying weight to our sensor, we know that you're planning at the depth you set. If they're not applying weight to the sensor, we know you're planning some amount shallower than the depth you've set. So ground contact simply is a measurement of, in the last 3 seconds, how much of the time was there weight being applied to our strain gauge or load cell. So I want my ground contact as close to 100% as possible. Margin is a measurement of after the gauge wheels come up and hit the stop, how much extra weight beyond that, how much more weight beyond depth, the depth I've set, is being added. So it's extra weight that's carried on the gauge wheels that causes compaction. If it compacts enough and the wrong things all line up, you're going to get poor root development and a small ear. So I want that margin number to be low. Now you want some, so if you're manually adjusting, you're going to have varying conditions across the field, some more dense than others. If you have seed hoppers, when they're full versus empty, you want to make sure that you're not losing ground contact when they're empty. So your margin might be higher with a full seed hopper versus empty. So ideally, this is a 3-second number, so margin is what's the lowest reading of extra weight in the last 3 seconds. So if I see a margin of 50 pounds, that means in the last 3 seconds my smallest reading was 50. I had a whole bunch of readings on the rows that were higher than that. So as you move through the field, if you fill your seed hoppers and you've got 50 pounds of seed in there, and your margin runs from 10 to 40, what's going to happen when your hopper's empty? You're going to start losing ground contact. If your seed hoppers are full with 50 pounds of seed and you see 120, 150, 100, 130 pounds of margin, when your seed hoppers are empty, you're going to be down to 70 or 80. Ideally, you want your ground contact as close to 100 as you can get it, and you want to keep your margin as low as you possibly can. But not so low that your ground contact continually dips down to 90%. So for any of these 4 boxes, if I touch the top, I get a bar graph. So here I can see a population bar graph. I'm going to go hit the back button in the bottom right. I'm going to touch the top of the singulation box. See bar graph here, multiples above the line, skips below. Touch on the top of the spacing box. I can see where spacing errors are occurring. If I touch on one of the bars, I get the row details. And you can see here what's going on in that row. Down here at the bottom, it's called the live seeds display. Every seed going past the sensor we classify as either good, and we make it green. Spacing error, where within 4 inches, we make it yellow. A double, we would have a red plant. A skip would be a circle with an X. So I haven't seen really any skips or doubles. If I want to change what row I'm looking at the details on the right side, there's an up and down button. I can touch those. Go to row 6. So here's singulation is very good. Well, there's a skip. Singulation is pretty good. Spacing is fairly poor. There's another skip. So what I would use this for is to look for patterns. So if I run a planner with finger meters, I've got 12 fingers per revolution. So if I see a skip come out from back there behind that closing system, if I see a skip and when it gets over to here, I see another skip. When it gets to here, another skip. When it gets to here, another skip. That's about every 12 seed. What do I have? Got a finger that's either broken, a spring that's broken. For some reason, one finger is not picking up a seed. I can see that a lot quicker than, well, I have 2% skips and 800 seeds per acre low on that row. So dive in here, you can see what's happening a little bit better. It's not always that obvious, but sometimes it will be. Now I hit home, and that takes me back to our home screen. Alright, so that's what we see on those 4 boxes. Now, on the right side, we can configure what we see on those 8 small boxes on the right side. Alright, so this is something each of you is going to want to do prior to going to the field. Okay, so these would be some steps to write down as far as how to get to configure what you see over here. So if we touch on the right side, I'm going to touch on setup. And then up at the top, we're going to touch systems. I'm going to touch display. And now in the upper left, dashboard buttons. Okay. So in here on the left side, you can see you can select from 4 buttons, 6, or 8. So if I touch 2 by 2, I see 4 instead of 8. So I don't have as many numbers on there. You can elect that. If I want to see 6, I can touch one of these in the middle. If I want to see 8, I can touch the bottom. So, it's whatever your personal preference is. Now, if I touch on any one of these boxes, that's saying I want to replace that one with a list that'll pop up after I touch it. So, for me, this average seat spacing, I'm not real concerned about because it's simply a mathematical average. So I'm going to touch on it and replace it. Here's the list of what I can replace it with. On the right side, the down arrow has a yellow square around it. Anytime you see on the 2020 a arrow up or down with a yellow square around it, it means in that direction of the yellow square, there's more options. Right? So we'll go through some of these. Skips, multiples, percentage of skips, percentage of multiples. If I were you, I would have that configured as one of them. So you can see singulation percentage, and then you can see percentage of errors and what type of error. The next one, seed release index. So good spacing tells me what percentage of seeds have at least 4 inches between them. So if I'm planting a population that gives me a seed every 7 inches, I can have seeds at 5, then 9, then 7, then 5, then 6, then 8, then 7, then 9. When the corn comes up, my spacing is very erratic, but none of them are closer than 4 inches. So there's not an agronomic impact. So your good spacing in that scenario is going to say 100%. But your meter performance is poor, or your seed tube bounce is occurring, whatever it is. So seed release index is a measurement, it's more absolute, there's no threshold. It is basically, it's mathematical, it's the standard deviation of seed spacing divided by average seed spacing. So basically what it means is, if SRI is at 0, it means every seed is right on the money, right where it should be, no variance, right? Not even 1/10 of an inch. So that's probably impossible to have it at 0, right? So if I have an SRI of, say, 20, what it means is the first 2 standard deviations, which is 95% of your bell curve. So an SRI of 20 means 95% of my seeds fall within 20% plus or minus of my average spacing. So if my average spacing is 6 inches, 20% of that's 1.2. So 7.2 to 5.8. I know that's not the exact right math, but that range encompasses the spacing of 95% of my seeds. If my SRI is 10, it's plus or minus 10% that encompasses 95% of my seeds. So an SRI of 10 is this range. An SRI of 20 is twice as wide. An SRI of 30 is another third as wide. So essentially an SRI of 30 means your seeds are coming through past the sensor so erratically that we really can't calculate if they're singulated well or not. It's kind of like if I dumped them in a coffee cup and dribbled them out. You really know rhyme or reason to how they're being planted. SRI below 20 is where you should be. If you get up above 20, either the meter's performing poorly, the seed lubricant, maybe you're not using seed lubricant, there's an obstruction in the seed tube, whatever it might be. I would recommend having meters calibrated. If you haven't had them calibrated, when Aaron calibrates them and you get a printout, it'll indicate what the SRI was on the test stand, so you'll have an idea. Okay, in a static environment without motion, without vertical bounce, this is what seed release index is in my meters. You know, it might go up 3 to 5% in the field. But if I have meters calibrated at 10%, and the SRI is 10, and then I go to the field and it's 25, I know the planter is causing some problem. Okay. The next button is good ride, so that's percentage of smoothness. So as the row units move up and down more, We have an accelerometer with 3 in vertical motion, and that good ride number is going to go down. So causes of that, it's going to be field conditions or field conditions combined with speed. The next one is seat spacing. That's that average number. The next one, heck shaft error. This is, excuse me, a measure of drive system stability. So if you have your population set that you're going to monitor to 32,000, and one half of the planter is planting 34, the other half is planting 32, you're going to have one, it's going to say good, and then a positive number because one side is overpopulated, indicating something in the drive system is problematic. It could be as simple as I set my transmission on the right side different than the left side, or it could be the ground drive tire is overinflated on that side and is getting basically more revolutions compared to the left side. It's a proper inflation. It could be that there's spacing errors on one side versus another. It's basically anything that is causing erratic turning or erratic planting on one side of the entire planter. It'll have a positive or a negative error. Now, singulation, spacing, and population will give you the same type of information. This is what it's derived from, so it's not an actual sensor on the heck shaft. It's based on how seeds are going past the seed tubes, or past the seed sensors. Okay. So if you have any errors, or something variable on the planter, it would say something other than good. Next row here, loss per acre. That's a measure of your singulation errors and spacing errors times an ear loss times a dollar figure for corn in price per bushel. So it's nothing different than what you're getting for singulation and spacing, but 98% sounds fairly good, but if it's costing you $8.50 an acre, it doesn't sound quite as good. So it's just a kind of a secondary measure to get people to stop a little bit quicker when there's errors occur. If you have a vacuum planter and you've added a vacuum sensor to plug into the 2020 system, you can have the vacuum button up there and it will display either 1, 2, or if you touched it, you could have up to 3 different vac sensors that you can see if you wanted to. Now I'm going to hit the down arrow a couple times. Alright, so you can see now in the top row, there's acres A, B, and F, then there's field acres, then there's acres A and acres B. So the 2020 has 3 acre counters. One is field acres. It changes and resets when you change the active field. If I go back to a field I previously planted in and make it active, it starts counting from where it left off. So if I plant 21 acres of a 40, get rained out, go plant another field, and then come back to that first field, make it active, it's going to say 21 acres planted, and continue to add acres. Acre counter A and B is one that you have the ability to reset as you desire. So you can have all 3 of them in one box. You can have just field acres up, just acre A, just acre B, or you can have all 4 if you wanted to. On the home screen, if you touch any one of those, it takes you where you can see acre counter A, acre counter B, and the field acres. So I would say select either probably acres, the one with all 3, or the field acre counter, because then touching that button will get you to see all of them. There's an acres per hour button down here that you can have if you wanted to. And then the other one down here, gallon per acre and PSI will be for like liquid control if you're using row flow liquid. Or you can add a flow sensor and a pressure sensor if you want to, and just monitor your flow and your pressure if you want to. So those are the different options. So if I was setting my 2020 up, what would I have? Give you some recommendations here. I would have skips and multiples. I would have good ride. I would have loss per acre. I would have an acre counter. Okay, so there's 4. So if you only want 4 on the side, there's those 4. I'm going to add more than that. If I had a vac planter with vac sensors, vacuum I would have. Then heck shaft, seed release index. So kind of in that order would be how I would add it. Now, if I have air force and row flow, I'm going to have those buttons up. If I have V-drive delta force, I'd have those buttons up. So I can set that system up here on the right side however I want. So I've got it set up like this. Now when I touch home, I see the same thing on that right side. So if I touch on the field acres button, you can see acre counter A and B up top, the reset button, and then the field acre counter down below. Alright. The next thing we need to set up is when the home screen turns yellow. The great thing about a 2020 is you set when the screen turns yellow, and if you set that correctly for your system, if you have a screen that is just solid green, plan away. If I notice there's something yellow, I know something's below the threshold I was comfortable with, and I need to pay attention to it. So it's not that I have to look at it, well, what's every number? If I get things set, I can look and say everything's green, I know everything's running within a parameter I'm happy with. Watch the planner. If I see things that are yellow, I can dive into it a little bit more. So to do this, we're going to touch Setup on the right, and then Crops up at the top. Now with corn being the active crop, I'm going to adjust my limits for corn. So down here at the bottom, there's limit adjustments. I'm going to touch on that. Alright, so the first thing is the population alarm. So 80%. So whatever, you can touch any of these boxes and change the number. Population alarm defaults to 80%. So that means when you are planning 80% of your target, you're going to get an audible alarm. It's going to make a sound, whatever sound selection you have. So it's indicating a row fail. In the same way, if you were planning 120% of your target, it would indicate a row fail as well. So there's that one. Now, all the other ones, except the misplaced seed limits, is a setting for when the boxes on the home screen are going to turn yellow. So population limit. If that's at 1,000 like it is right now, if you say I'm going to plant 34, if you have one row below 33 or above 35, the low or the high box will turn yellow. If your planter average is 1,000 higher or lower, then the entire large population box turns yellow. Right? So if you have a planter that plants row by row, the population is very consistent, I leave it at 1,000. But if your population row to row is, up to 1,000 seeds variable, just because of the way the planter plants, you might want to put that at 2,000. The singulation limit, going across the top. This is one of the more important ones because singulation is a very important factor to yield. So if I touch on that box, I can select any of these preset numbers or I can select other. So you want to set this right below the singulation performance you expect from your meters. So if I'm operating a VSET meter, such as what this planter of Aaron's has on it, I'd probably set this at 99%. Then if I have one row that's singulating below 99, it's going to alert me. If the planter average is below 99, the big box is going to turn yellow. All right, VSETs should singulate above 99 all the time. Now, if I had a finger planter, and I had this set at 99, because the finger planter has more variation to it, that singulation box just might be yellow all the time. And if that's the case, that's not doing me much good. If it's constantly yellow, and then one row drops 3%, it's still yellow. There's no change. So if my singulation that I expect out of my meters is 97.5%, I might touch other and set my singulation limit at 97. Because then if I drop off 0.5%, I get a yellow box. Right? So it's just, this should be set right below singulation you can expect. So if you have your meters calibrated, you have an idea of what your singulation will be, and you can use that to set this. So then these other alerts, there's a smooth ride limit. 90% is probably a good spot to have that. It's going to vary field to field, depending on your tillage conditions, how this is going to be set. Spacing limit, 95 is a good spot to have that. Ground contact limit, that along with singulation is a very important one. Shallow plants, or shallow planted seeds, planted in drier soil, have a real great opportunity to emerge late, which is a negative thing, and not have it here. So we want that ground contact up high, so 95 is a good spot. SRI limit, 20 is a good spot for that. So I hit enter, And this crops tab is the same place I would change my crop. So all those limits, plus up here, all these things, are going to change to what I set them for when I change the crop. So now, if I go change crop, I'm going to select soybeans. You might have to add other crops, but now my soybeans active. So now if I touch limit adjustments, now you can see the population limit here is 3,000 instead of 1,000. So you might want to make that 3,000, you might want to make that wider. For soybeans, in most cases, singulation and spacing will not be accurate and potentially not be shown. So it depends on how many seeds per second are going by the sensors. Many times with soybeans there's so many seeds per second we cannot accurately determine a singulation or spacing value. But your ground contact limit, smooth ride limit, I would leave that the same. Depth control is still just as important. Cross tab, so setup and then cross. So on here, the seeds to average. So I talked about at the beginning that population singulation spacing was a measure of the last 300 seeds. Now if I go to corn, that's at 300. I change crop, go to soybeans, 1,500. So roughly 10% of my population. So that one, if you leave that at 300 on soybeans, your population is just going to constantly be jumping around. Okay. Anybody here have a split row 15-inch planter? Okay. What model?
1780.
Okay, 1780. Okay, so for you, in here, when you have corn selected, your active rows, it's going to be probably your odds. Now if I go change crop to soybeans, active rows, on yours you're going to make it all. Now, when I change the corn, it automatically changes my active rows. If I change the soybeans, it changes my active rows. Okay? Now everybody else, if you just have a 30-inch planter, you plant corn and beans at 30 inches, your active rows will be all for both. Down in the bottom left, economic adjustments. Here is what determines what the loss per acre box is showing you. So your loss per skip is 80% when you're 40% for multiple, 10% when you're within 4 inches, 20% within 2.5. Here's your price per bushel. What should you have in here? Honestly, guys, this is not something I would go in and mess with constantly because loss per acre is also is derived from your singulation and spacing. And put a price per bushel in there if you have that loss per acre button showing. And then basically down here, up to $4 loss is going to say good. And then it's going to turn different colors as it gets above that $4. If you put this $4 number, the loss limit good at 0, it's always going to give you a dollar figure. It'll never say good. Alright, so go back to home. If we touch the setup button, we'll talk more about this. Basically, I suggest touching your setup button after you pull into the field and you're ready to plant, and make sure that the field name, corn hybrids, and population is set correctly. So up here with planter, Aaron will help you get that set up. That's very simple. You just set up your planter, rows and everything. You're going to change your active rows back into limits, the crops tab. We'll talk here a little bit about how to add fields. But field name up there, if the field name in there is not what I want, you can change the active field from the 2020 or from the Field View app on the iPad. But if I touch on that box, I can see a list of fields. In the upper left are clients, the upper right are farms. Here are my fields. If I want to make a different field active, touch it. And on the right side it says make active. If I touch make active, it'll then make that field active.
And you have to touch make active.
Yes. If I hit home right now,
Did not change the field.
demo field is still active. It did not change it.
Made that mistake many times, or my dad has.
Okay, corn hybrids. Down here, if I go to my crops tab, and if I change my crop to soybeans, now it's says soybeans varieties. So if I have corn in the planter and it says soybean varieties, I know I better go change my crop. So we'll change the crop to corn. Go back to the plant tab. Now you can assign up to 4 active hybrids at once. So some of you might have the same hybrid across all your rows. Some of you might have a half planter with each hybrid, have 2. Some of you might have, you know, whatever, 3 rows of refuge and the rest of your rows GMO. Whatever, however it's set up, if you touch this corn hybrids box, basically you can change things, and then this toolbar down at the bottom with the pink rows will match what colors you've assigned. All right, so I touch here. Right now that cow number is assigned to all rows. So if I want to change that, I touch in here where it says hybrid A. Now I can add a hybrid. Now there's a list of hybrids already loaded in here. Also on field view, and we'll show that there's a list of hybrids. So you can change the active hybrid from either place. G14R38 3000 GT. Okay, it's going to default to 80,000 seeds per unit. If I want to add some of these other metrics, I can, but it's not really going to change anything as far as how the system works. So from here, I want to hit enter. What rows do I have that hybrid on? I can select all, left or right. If I already have one assigned, I can touch others, or if I have this one on something other than all left or right, I can touch list. And then they're all X'd out, whichever ones I touch on, it's going to make active. So I hit enter. Now I've got that on those 3 rows, these are grayed out. So now I can touch hybrid B. Add a hybrid. Now here, I could go and do the others, and it would be on all the rest, or if you touch list and touch on the other 13 rows, it would assign it. So there I see my colors. If that picture physically matches what I've loaded on the planter, go home, and then if I touch setup, you can see it lists what I've got. So I want to make sure the right field is active. I want to make sure my hybrids or varieties are assigned correctly. Population box, single setting over on the right. Whatever you've set your planter to plant, you're going to touch set point 1. Type in whatever population you've physically set the planter to, 34,500 let's say, enter. Now it's going to monitor based on that number. So my population alarm, if I get to 80% of 34.5 or 120, it's going to audibly make a sound. If I get 1,000 seeds high or low, or 2,000, depending what I have my limit set at, the box will turn yellow. I pull into another field, I'm going to plant 32,000. I want to hit my setup, then here on population, touch that, set point 1, type in 32,000, enter. Now it's going to monitor off of that. If I set it to 34.5, plant a field, go to the next field, change my transmission to 32, and start planting. With only monitoring here, it doesn't affect what happens, but that box, your population box, will immediately be yellow as you start planting. You might be planting the correct population, but because you didn't tell the 2020 you were doing something different, it's going to turn yellow. All these other ones are for if you're variable rating or planting seed corn, that type of thing. Right, so basically, before every field, if you look at those 3 boxes and make sure they're assigned correctly, it's going to do multiple things. It's going to keep track of units of seed correctly, put all the data in the right field, monitor correctly, but most of all, on field view, your maps are going to be correct and accurate.